Are you serious? Are you serious? The water's turning blood red.
See here, except I want to show you what I mean about their technique of just blacking things out. Like I said, they used to me it looks like some of the older stuff, they used to take like a black Sharpie marker, just black out what they didn't want and then rescan it. And I'm going to show you how they do that. When I say they cover something up with black, this is what I mean. Oh, what do we got here, NASA? Whoa! There's numerous photos that they do this in. Numerous. I can't even count them. You know, look at some of this stuff. But this is what's going on. This is what NASA's doing. And then they release this stuff to the public. This is from the Cassini probe. This is Titan. I don't even believe that this is here, first of all, okay? There's definitely something behind it that's emitting all types of light. Now, if you can tell me how this is not, look, they just covered part of it. I don't even believe that this is, I believe that this is just cut in. It's too much of a perfect circle. They used like a circle tool and just cut this out and pasted it, as far as I'm concerned. But this nonsense, this is what I mean when I tell you that NASA's blacking something out. This is.
So while we all went about our lives yesterday, we came very close to a catastrophic event here on planet Earth, and we didn't know about it. It turns out we just missed getting hit by an asteroid, a piece of solid rock, roughly the size of a 10-story building. Now, I say just missed because it came within 45,000 miles of us. That's a lot closer than the moon is, and scientists say way too close for something that big. Had it struck, again, the people who tell us about these things, say the impact could have had the force of 1,000 Hiroshima-strength atomic bombs over a huge area of the Earth.
There are quite a few theories about how the world might end. For example, it's been suggested that there could be a big solar storm which would take the world out. Well, we get solar storms from time to time, and they're a bit troublesome if you're an astronaut. Indeed, not good news if you're an astronaut. But down here on Earth, we're protected by the Earth's magnetosphere, the effects of the magnetic field. And okay, solar storms can disturb that. They can produce currents in power lines that sometimes cause trouble. They can take out satellites, stop satellites working. So they could affect our GPS and any telephone calls that go by satellite, for example. But they're not going to end the world. Every so often asteroids do hit the Earth. We know, we can see some of the craters. There's Meteor Crater, or Barringer Crater as it's properly called, in Arizona. And there's traces of a very big crater, partly on the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula and partly under the sea. That big crater was the result of an impact about 65 million years ago, and it's thought that's what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other things. So a big thing like that could cause us some problems. Broadly speaking, what happens is when something big like that impacts, it not only makes a crater, it kicks up a whole lot of dust into the atmosphere. And the atmosphere cuts out the sunlight, and that stops crops growing and foods fail and there's starvation and so on. So that is something we need to look out for, and we are looking out for. There's an array of telescopes all around the world monitoring the sky night after night, actually monitoring about 1,000 potentially hazardous objects, things that might come and hit the Earth one day. As they monitor them, they discover that the vast majority of them won't, that as they get the orbit more accurately, they see it'll miss the Earth. But if there was something coming to hit the Earth, we'd get 2 or 3 years' notice. And even with today's technology, we could divert it so that it didn't impact the Earth. And there's research going on all the time which will improve that technology to hit us. Some of the techniques they use to deflect an asteroid, one of them is to paint it white all over, which means it reflects sunlight very well. And the sunlight bouncing off the asteroid will push it sideways so that it'll move away and not hit the Earth. That's one of the neatest solutions. But they're also developing what they call gravity tractors, satellites that are pretty heavy and through their own gravity can attract the asteroid and make it change course. And there's also some that will actually physically hook onto the asteroid and tug it aside. So there's lots of ways of doing this. The magnetic field of the Earth, the thing that makes your compass point due north, that flips over every so often. And I'm using flip as a geologist would use flip. The flip actually takes 5,000 years.
Rice planting on a test basis has begun in a village near the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This comes after the central government lifted its ban on entering Kawauchi village in April. Rice planting in the area had been banned at all paddies following the nuclear accident last March. The purpose of this year's harvest is to verify the product's safety. On Sunday, about 40 farmers and volunteers began planting rice at 30 rice paddies. Fabric that absorbs radioactivity was laid near entrances of irrigation channels. Villagers have also sowed into the soil substances that absorb radioactivity. Once the safety of this year's harvest is confirmed, rice production will be fully resumed for the next season.
I'm very happy to be planting rice along with so many others. I hope the safety of the rice will be confirmed so that the village can fully begin producing rice next year.
From Plato's Republic was the idea that population should be controlled and unwanted life should be disposed of like trash. In other words, that some were worthy of life and others weren't. This is a concept that comes through in Darwin's ideas about survival of the fittest. If we are evolving towards individual perfection by natural means, that would mean that collectively we are in fact evolving towards a utopian society of perfect men and women. However, in that case, those with perceived poor genetic material would be slowing that collective evolution, and so the whole process could be accelerated by getting rid of those who are not made of the right stuff. The end goal of a utopian society of purebred humans would justify the means of getting rid of the lesser ones. Remember that the full title of Origin of Species was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. One of the major influences on Darwin was a man called Thomas Malthus, who received the blessings of French deist Jean-Jacques Rousseau and famous Scottish philosopher David Hume. Incidentally, David Hume has a prominent statue on Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and if you look at the back of it, you will see this sun god symbol. Now, Thomas Malthus authored a document called The Essay on the Principle of Population, where he concluded that, amongst other things, society should adopt policies that prevent the human population from growing disproportionately larger than the food supply. Malthus, again finding a root in Plato's Republic, proposed genocide to make sure this didn't happen. Specifically, he thought to target the poor. He says, Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns we should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses and court the return of the plague. In the country we should build our villages near stagnant pools, and particularly encourage settlement in all marshy and unwholesome situations. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases, and those benevolent but much mistaken men who have thought they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders. Malthus believed that by such methods, the undesirables in society could be effectively culled. He said regarding children, "We are bound in justice and honour formally to disclaim the right of the poor to support. To this end I should propose a regulation be made declaring that no child born should ever be entitled to parish assistance. The illegitimate infant is comparatively speaking of little value to society, as others will perish, unless room be made for them by the deaths of grown persons. The logic behind the idea that those who serve society least should be destroyed was echoed under Darwinism in the survival of the fittest. The individual is lost in the collective. Again, the end of a utopian society justifies the means of killing the poor and the weak. This naturally leads to another idea put forward by Plato, that people who are perceived to have pure genetic materials should be encouraged to breed amongst themselves to produce a race of supermen fit for ruling over the masses. This selective breeding is called eugenics. Eugenics actually found its Enlightenment era origin in Charles Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton. Galton regurgitated the thoughts of Plato in his work, Hereditary Genius, which was basically a racist tirade advocating a system of selective breeding for purposes of providing more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing over the less suitable. In other words, trying to artificially speed the upward course that evolutionists thought we were naturally already on. In truth, selective breeding had been practiced for some time amongst the elite. Inbreeding was commonplace amongst the ruling class to protect the genetic purity of their future stock. Galton merely took this idea and popularized it as a legitimate science. This very same tradition was in fact practiced by Charles Darwin himself in the hopes of maintaining a genetic superiority in his own bloodline. Darwin married the youngest granddaughter of his maternal father. Researcher Ian Taylor reveals the outcome of this project. Darwin's idea of inbreeding to produce superior stock can be seen to be a complete disaster in the case of his own 10 children. Of the 10, one girl, Mary, died shortly after birth. Another girl, Anne, died at the age of 10 years. His eldest daughter, Henrietta, had a serious and prolonged breakdown at 15 in 1859. 3 of his 6 sons suffered such frequent illness that Darwin regarded them as semi-invalids, while his last son, Charles Jr., was born mentally retarded and died in 1858, 19 months after his birth. Science has shown that inbreeding actually leads to speedier destruction of the genetic code rather than evolution because of something called biological mutations, which is why so-called purebred dogs are in fact more prone to health problems than mixes. The errors in their genetic code multiply as they are bred amongst themselves over long periods. But where true science fails, the religion of scientism continues stubbornly on. If they had followed God's wisdom in Leviticus 18, they would have heeded the warning not to commit incest, and they would have been all the better for it. In their own human wisdom, however, they persisted and reaped the consequences. The idea of eugenics continued to be promoted in the scientific community for a long time afterwards. At the turn of the 20th century, in 1901, the Statistics Department of London's University College became the headquarters for the Eugenics Education Society. Motivated by Galton's vision of a future utopia ruled by a genetically engineered pure elite, the Eugenics Society grew into a successful political movement and would eventually inspire Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews. Population control is still a big issue for the elite today. As recently as May 24, 2009, The Times reported of a secret meeting of billionaires held in New York City, including the likes of Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, where the #1 issue on the agenda was how to cap the global population at 8...
Bill Gates, interestingly enough. So watch this, listen to this, and we'll talk a bit and discuss population control.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of P2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First we've got population. Now the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to, now if we do a really great job on vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But
Alright, now I want to run that back because I know it's my phone and skips. People are going to complain. complaining about my video, blah, 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 blah. This is up on YouTube, as I said, so you can go watch it yourself. There's longer versions, shorter versions. But let's listen to what he really said. 6 billion going up to 9 billion. And if we do a really good job, let's really listen when he says that.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that.
Wait a minute.
Look at it. This is what's washing up. And as it washes up, it's bringing all these jelly things. What is that? It's all over.
State warns on EMP. There's no help coming. Oh, this was interesting. Washington. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer has signed legislation to require the state's Department of Emergency and Military Affairs to prepare materials outlining what citizens need to know to deal with either a natural or man-made electromagnetic pulse event that could knock out the vulnerable electrical grid system over a wide geographical region. But if this isn't another red alert for you, I don't know what else to tell you. The legislation, SB 1476, was introduced by Senator David Farnsworth. It includes the type and quantity of food, water, and medical supplies that each person should stockpile in case an EMP occurs over the U.S. What? The legislation, however, doesn't require actual hardening of the grid within a state. Unreal. And, Russia sanctions, I almost read the NBA bans, Russia sanctions not tough enough yet, analysts say. Well, if they get any quote-unquote tougher, they're going to be really attacking Putin, and that's just going to make him mad. I mean, it's not doing anything. It's actually creating another financial system to fall back on when this one collapses.
So, do you believe in global warming?
Yes, I do. Global warming is a bad way to phrase it. Do I believe in climate change? Yes.
Yeah, to an extent I do.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Why do you believe global warming?
Because there's scientifically valid proof that global warming exists.
Because it's getting hotter and colder. Like, I've been in Georgia my whole life, and we've never really seen snow the way we've seen it the past 2 years. Yeah, so.
Because I think that humans have an effect on the planet that has been observed through scientific reasoning.
Because it's been proven, like scientific evidence shows, like, no, we're going to ruin our Earth. Yeah.
It's self-evident. The ice is melting. We're all doomed. We're all going to die.
I really don't know what's going on with the government. I know there are tons of weather machines. I know all the weather isn't real weather, so it's kind of like, who knows, you know? Right. 1 minute it's snowing, 1 minute it's raining, then it's hot and it's cold, so you just roll with it.
Yeah, climate change or global warming, yeah, I'm fairly certain that it's, you know, created by the activities of humans.
Do you have any ideas of how we can maybe fix it?
Eat the rich. That's all.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Here's why some believe a pole shift, a serious one, a complete one, may be on the near horizon. On December 29, 2003, NASA released this article about our migrating pole. The bottom location, 1831, in approximately 70 years it moved up one notch to 1904. Approximately 70 years later, up in 1972, it moved considerably more. And it moved about that same distance in 29 years, well less than half the time. Now, the magnetic north was measured in 2005 at 82.7 degrees north, 114.4 degrees west. Now, each block here is 5 by 5 degrees, so it would be about here where the cursor is. A later study revealed that the pole is trekking towards Russia at about 40 miles per year, but not there yet. And that's all we know. Russia and Europe got tossed this winter. The USA had a light go of it. But the North Pole has not been measured in Russia, and if you happen to know otherwise for a fact, please send a link. Let's be clear, the increasingly fleet-footed North Pole may change direction, stop entirely, speed up, or something else. This may never be anything to worry about, and then again, a complete magnetic reversal could happen this century, or this year. If you read these articles, you will see that the pole is not going at a constant speed. Take that into your considerations. Be safe, everyone.
In 812, when the fourth angel blew his trumpet, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars was struck, so that 1/3 of them turned dark. 1/3 of the day was kept from shining, and also the night. I believe this judgment may be declaring a shift in the axis of the earth. This would cause 1/3 of the day to be lost, as the earth starts to revolve around a new axis, which would alter the orbit of the sun, moon, stars and planets. And the sun would rise and set in a different place. And the moon would also appear to have altered its orbit. A shift in the axis of the earth could indeed cause 1/3 of the day and night to be lost. And instead of a 24-hour day, we would experience a 16-hour day. If the earth loses 8 hours, then sunset would occur at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Which means, all the clocks in the world would have to be reset. God has done things like this before. In 2 Kings 20 verse 8, God made the sun go backwards, and then forward again. Which would mean that the Earth's rotation would have rolled back, still for a while. Which means that both the Earth and the Moon's revolution stopped altogether.
The technology does exist. It is real as you or me, and it's a whole lot more out there than even the most diehard believers could possibly fathom. The truth is that we, and by we I mean this planet and the people of this planet, are in essence blind to what is really going on in the cosmos and interstellar space. What people call aliens, we call IBs, or in layman's terms, interdimensional beings. And what we found out and have known about since the early 70s is that, in simplest terms, other dimensions or planes, as we call them, exist and lay on top of each other, almost stacked, as if you had a blanket with another blanket stacked on top of it and another blanket stacked on top of it. To explain it so you can understand, you can imagine the Earth and our reality as a thin blanket, and all of these other higher dimensions are the blankets laying directly on top of ours. However, we can only see our own blanket. Now, the alien beings, or the ships that we have seen in videos, and that many people have captured over the years, are in fact what we call jumpers, in that they exist in their relative dimensions, but have in fact jumped into ours. We have discovered that most of the time we are unable to see them, as they are at a wavelength indifferent to our own, and our senses, eyes and ears cannot detect. From the information that I have gathered and been briefed on, every planet, star, and galaxy within our own plane and universe, as we see it, exists also in these other dimensions. we've detected that we know of and that I've been briefed on at least 4 other dimensions that do exist. Now, as I said, every planet we know of, every galaxy does exist in these other dimensions. However, with each new dimension, each planet, galaxy, star takes on a different form. To explain it in the most simplest terms, you can look at our own planet, Jupiter, which is in the outer reaches of our solar system. Now, to us, it's a deadly gaseous planet, completely uninhabitable. However, when you look at Jupiter in an elevated dimension, you will see that it has completely changed in all forms. You will see that it's no longer a deadly ball of gas, but is now solid, has a different color, and is now inhabited. Attack to these higher dimensions and actually get a small view of what the solar system looks like on the other side, as we call it, in these other dimensions. There is much we do not know about the universe and how it works. However, here are the facts that I can confirm as truth and were made known to me, and that I and the other people that I worked with have been briefed on. Now, we are not alone in the universe. There are alien beings within our own dimension of space, as well as other dimensions. The planet Earth is an early stage, I guess you could say, training ground, if you will, whereby which we as beings will live until we advance to the higher dimensions. Now, we are not the bottom of the food chain, and we have discovered that there are at least 2 dimensions below our own plane. But that is as far as I will go regarding that. Now, I'm getting a little bit low on time, so I will leave you with a few other important things that people will no doubt want to know about later in time once this video is made public. Now, these are things that I have been briefed on by my superiors and that are common knowledge in the Black Ops community. Now, the planet that we know of as Mars was at one time inhabited, but again, at one time was wiped out by the people who inhabited the planet, which were much more technologically advanced than we are. Which we discovered by testing and analyzing the chemical residue found from the blasts around the planet, as well as artifacts that we've also discovered on the planet, including the infamous glass tubes seen in the few of the publicly made photographs from NASA. Now, these are not glass structures, but a glass-like material that is about 1,000 times stronger than any material or steel that we have on our own planet. These tubes were used as a means of travel underground and above ground by the people who inhabited this planet. It is thought from our research that there are still an ET presence inhabiting Mars, but again, this is as far as I will go, and that I was briefed on regarding that matter. Now, I'm not trying to be completely vague, but I am trying to give you a picture of what is going on out there that doesn't completely put me in more danger than I am already in just by revealing the few things that I have. One of the last things that I will reveal, and that is definitely a fact, and that I have been briefed on, and that many other people involved with the Black Ops community have been briefed on, and that is our own moon, which does in fact have alien bases on it, and also has bases from our own government. Now, there is an ET presence, which is primarily located on the dark side of the moon. The Apollo program was in all actuality a reconnaissance mission, so that we could research what was exactly there and who. You will notice that many of the photos from the Apollo missions have airbrushed out buildings and bases, and this is the truth of the matter. About half of the video that you will see that is documented from the Apollo missions was in fact shot here on Earth at Area 51. In fact, if you look at satellite imagery, you can actually see what's left of a crater field created at Area 51 that was used in the filming. Now, the truth is that most of the footage from the moon showing what were a constant presence of alien vehicles flying over the surface, cluttering up the footage. So again, they showed the American people what they could and recreated the rest here on Earth that they couldn't show. From what we know, the dark side of the moon is where most of the alien presence is located. It's a more primitive alien race from what we can see, and our research tells us. It's more primitive than the alien beings you would see on higher dimensions, but still thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us. Now we have our own bases, which are primarily located in or near the Sea of Tranquility, which is the site of Apollo 11, and also one base that I know of located near the crater Sabine D. To this day, we're still sending secret missions to and from the moon. However, I do not know the complete details of what we are doing there.
Drawn-out war on drugs. But another war is being waged that you may know nothing about, the war against the homeless. On April 18th, the ACLU sent a letter to both the Department of Justice and the Detroit Police Department urging that the practice of dumping the homeless be stopped. A year-long ACLU investigation claims the following. Detroit police officers stopped people perceived to be homeless in the tourist area of Greektown in Detroit. They forced them into vans, took them for a ride, and deserted them miles away. The sad truth, Detroit isn't the only city that treats the homeless this way. Joining me now from Detroit is Michael Steinberg, legal director of the ACLU of Michigan. Nice to have you, Michael.
Thank you, Melissa.
So tell me, what did your investigation show that the police were doing to folks who are experiencing homelessness in Detroit?
Essentially what the police were doing were kidnapping individuals off the streets of tourist-friendly areas of Detroit, putting them in handcuffs, throwing them in the back of a wagon or a police car, and transporting them either outside the city or to deserted parts of the city and abandoning them. They then tell the individuals that they weren't welcome back into Greektown or other tourist-friendly areas. Sometimes they'd make it difficult for them to return by making them throw their money down a storm drain. And the problem, of course, is that the lifeline for many of these individuals is in Greektown. There are warming centers, there's food and churches and other services. So they'd have to walk sometimes through the middle of Michigan winter. One person had a blood clot in his leg.
On to something.
Okay.
Didn't ask who we were. You know, get in the van.
I asked him if I was free to go. He told me no.
You took like maybe a 15-minute ride.
You don't know where you're going, you don't know where you're ending up. Maybe when you get there, you're abused in some way. What would that feel like?
And we're walking back. It took us almost 5 hours to get back. Walking, it was cold.
So, Michael, have the Detroit Police Department or the Department of Justice addressed these concerns?
Well, we had the quickest response time in Detroit by the police in history, I think. As soon as we sent our letter, they sent over 2 members of Internal Affairs saying they wanted to investigate it. They've met with some of the individuals that we've spoken to, and we hope it will put an end to it. We've also reported it to the Department of Justice because we believe that the practice violates the consent judgment that was entered into between the DOJ and the Detroit Police Department.
So, Michael, Michael, part of what we've been talking about this morning is criminalizing drugs, but there's also this kind of impact of criminalizing homelessness. And we were looking at, not only in Detroit, but sort of all over the country, municipalities doing things like making it illegal to sleep or sit in a store or in personal buildings, laws punishing people for begging or panhandling, enforcement of these so-called quality of life ordinances. Tell me, is there a war on the homeless?
You can definitely appropriately characterize it as a war on the homeless. We are challenging a state law in Michigan that makes it a crime to beg in public. We have represented individuals who have been charged with trespass for sleeping on public land. They're essentially criminalizing the status of being homeless. Society, if we want to stop seeing homeless people on the streets, we as a society have to treat the problem as a social problem, not a criminal justice problem. We have to provide mental health services to those who need it. We have to provide drug treatment programs for those who need it in public housing. We can't make it a crime to be homeless. Homelessness is not going to go away by making it illegal.
Michael Steinberg in Detroit, I so appreciate that point, and it dovetails so nicely with what we're talking about in terms of drugs. We have a set of social responsibilities, epidemiological problems here. It is not solved through criminalizing. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Crazy.
It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
You to vote on the news, and here's the winner. There's a huge, hidden, heavenly body right here in our solar system. Evidence is mounting that either a brown dwarf star or a gas giant planet is lurking at the outermost reaches of our solar system, far beyond the planet Pluto. According to the British newspaper, The Independent, the object is 4 times the size of Jupiter. Experts say the presence of such a massive object could explain why a barrage of comets has been coming from that direction. We'll post.
Hi, my name is David Morrison. I'm a NASA space scientist, and I want to talk to you very briefly about Nibiru. I'm doing this because I received a note from a 12-year-old girl recently that said she wondered if the video I made 2 years ago was still valid, that she and her classmates were scared about Nibiru, and could I please explain, from a science point of view, why we know Nibiru is not real and is not a danger. You know, the simplest thing to say is just that there is no credible evidence whatever for the existence of Nibiru. There are no pictures, there's no tracking, there's no astronomical observations.
Are we being primed, Gordon, for some major announcement?
Well, that's the thing is, now, the Zetas say that the Council of Worlds has told the president, you've got to announce it. I say, you know, everyone I tell that to goes, well, I'll eat my hat if the president ever announced that. But if he did, you know, you can speculate that the first thing he would say is Ronald Reagan had an executive order that this is top secret, and every other president signed on. But now I'm going to be the one who's breaking that because everybody has to know.
And what would he, well, we're coming up to the break. When we come back, speculate on what you think he would say, okay? With our special guest, Gordon James Gianni Noto. And we're talking about Planet X. Now, he has sent us some interesting pictures that you should get up to coasttocoastam.com and just take a look at them and make up your own mind. And I'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. If you need to email me, that's George at coasttocoastam.com. Well, next hour, we'll take your phone calls with Gordon James Gianninoto as we talk about Planet X. And welcome back to Coast with Gordon James Gianninoto. Gordon, let's speculate a little bit on if there's an announcement of this planet. How will it be announced?
Well, there's two lines of thought. One is from the Zetas that the Council of Worlds has told the president that he has to announce it. The other is my line of thought, which is that how can he not announce it? Because as Planet X comes closer and closer to the Earth, eventually it's going to come very close. It's going to be as large as the full moon, and it's going to grab the Great Atlantic Rift and pull it up. And people don't realize that the continents are granite, and they float on the magma core. So they're just floating there. So the Great Atlantic Rift is a line of mountains right down the center of the Atlantic Ocean from Iceland to Antarctic, and there's an upwelling of magma right there. And as the North Pole of Planet X is in line with the Sun, as Planet X is in line with the Sun, and the North Pole is pointed at the Earth, it's every day when the Atlantic Ocean faces the Sun, the Atlantic Rift gets pulled down towards Planet X, and then as the Earth continues to turn, it gets released, because when the North Pole of Earth starts going towards the North Pole of Planet X, then it gets pushed back. But so eventually what's going to happen is Planet X is going to grab the crust. It's going to be close enough that the crust will stop turning with the core. So nothing changes the core, and nothing changes the North Pole of Earth pointing up. But what's going to happen is Planet X is trying to go by, and the day it goes by, it's going to grab the crust and slide it up over the North Pole and then let go of it. And when it lets go of it, the new North Pole is going to be the eastern tip of Brazil, Recife, Brazil. And there's going to be 600-foot tidal waves followed by the tail of Planet X brushing the Earth with all these rocks, which was one of them was the meteor over Russia.
So you're talking catastrophe here.
Absolute catastrophe. But the thing is that after that, with no governments and no religions and no economy, the unselfish ETs are going to come and give unspecified help to unselfish survival communities. So, because people say, well, all the nuclear reactors are all on faults all over the world, but they could transmute the half-life of plutonium from 125,000 years to 1.25 seconds. So, but they haven't said what they're going to do, because we're supposed to be taking some responsibility for ourselves. So,
what's the timetable on this?
Well, see, that's the thing. There isn't a timetable, and that's the number one question everyone asks. Well, when is this going to happen? But the thing is it could happen at any time. The only country that's taken any provision is China, which has built these ghost cities, because remember I had said that the southeastern China plate was going to be sinking. Well, Jakarta, Indonesia, parts of it are 85 feet below sea level. That sinking is almost 70% complete in that tip of the Southeast Asian plate. But all the other earth changes have stopped. And I was talking to Nancy on the phone. I said, that I heard that these metal boxes were found on the beaches in Oregon, and they were vibrating. And I said, I think there's extraterrestrial devices. And Nancy started saying, no, I've told you before, there's no extraterrestrial devices on Earth. And all of a sudden the Zetas broke through Nancy, and speaking through her to me, they said, this is absolutely true. And she later wrote about this, and this was, you remember, people have said, well, there weren't any boxes, or it was a hoax, or whatever, but it is true. On all the faults of the Earth, there are tens of thousands of these boxes vibrating, and what they're doing is, instead of letting the movement of the plates, because the roiling of the magma deep in the core of the Earth is causing these quakes and these other shifts. The north end of South America is going to move to the west. The north end of Africa is going to move to the east. The Atlantic is going to get wider. The Pacific is going to get narrower. So there's all these things. And the Zetas had said there was an event calendar, and 7 was preliminary Earth changes, 8 was massive social change, and 9 was worldwide volcanoes, earthquakes, and sinkings. And so anyway, these metal boxes have put that off, and the reason why is because they want to have the massive social change. And you can imagine if the president does announce it, of course there's going to be massive social change.
Well, if it's going to happen, will he announce it? To me, it sounds like he's compelled to.
Well, that's my thinking, is because when it finally gets separates from the sun far enough that you can see it with your naked eye. Now, I've said I've gone out, my wife has gone out, I've got hundreds of pictures of 2 suns in the sky that I took myself. Now, if I can do that, then anyone can do that. And, so there it is. There's this bright glowing area. You're not looking at Planet X itself because it's in between the Earth and the sun, so it's like trying to photograph the new moon. You just can't do it. But it's got a 5 million mile long or 10 million mile long. It's really, it's a long tail, twin-stranded, stretching towards the Earth because of static electricity. So Planet X is not going anywhere. It's sitting there. And the clump of 4 planets, the dark twin, Venus, the Earth, and Planet X, are still rotating around the sun, but they're not moving in relation to each other. And the tail is stretched towards the Earth, so that rock that came down over Russia and the other ones that were seen over San Francisco and Cuba and Japan are all from the tail of planet rocks, and there's trillions of them. So this is going to be a big disaster. So when the president announces it, and I mean, I'm not sitting in his office privy to whatever they're deciding, but I can tell you this. They really don't want people he's not going to use the word Planet X because that's the term that the Zetas have used and that is on Zeta Talk is Planet X.
That's panic time, right?
So they don't want people to run to Google, do a search, and go, oh, look, there's a woman in Wisconsin who's been in telepathic contact with extraterrestrials, because that reveals 2 things. We're about to have giant disasters, and second of all, there are extraterrestrials who have been telling the truth since 1995. So they don't want to do that. So it's interesting that they started talking about it as Nibiru. So I was talking to Nancy, and she's starting to, every time she says Planet X, she goes AKA Nibiru or dash Nibiru or slash Nibiru, so that if anybody does a Google search on Nibiru, they're still going to come up with Zeta Talk. So he's going to say, look, Reagan signed an executive order making it top secret. Every president signed on, but I'm such a humanitarian that I'm telling you that there has been a planet between the Earth and the Sun for 9 years, and why not? I mean, if it separates from the Sun where every single person on Earth looks up and goes, oh my God, what's that? And the glowing area, the thing that's at the 5 o'clock position, is the tail, which is sort of transparent, translucent, whatever you want to say, because it's a cloud of dust or red iron oxide dust. It's lit by the sun, and you can see that from Earth. So that's what people are taking pictures of, is the tail of Planet X stretching towards the Earth. And you can't see Planet X itself, but one of these days, when it gets far enough from the sun, you are going to see it. And then at that day, George, don't you think everyone's going to go, the government couldn't tell us there's a planet?
Sure, absolutely. No,
and they're never going to believe another word the government ever says again for any reason.
Not at all. All right, 6.8 billion people, Gordon, on the planet. How many people may perish?
Probably 60% are going to die exactly at the moment of pole shift, and another 30% are going to die from disease and starvation and shock. I mean, what the president should be announcing and saying, listen, we've got to move away from the coastlines. I mean, imagine what a 600...
And what's the timetable again?
Well, that's the thing is, like, there isn't a timetable. There's an event timetable, but the president has been trying to announce it since last September. So first they tried with the emergency broadcast system.
That was all screwed up.
That didn't work. And then, believe it or not, I mean, you think if you're president, you can just announce whatever the hell you want. And no, you can't, because there are people, the elite and the rich and the powerful, don't want you to stop going to your job. I mean, if they announced the whole truth, do you think anyone would show up for their job? Pilots, policemen, firemen, truck drivers?
No, people would want to be with their friends and family.
Right, and they'd all head for Wyoming and Montana and places like that. as far away from the coast as they can.
The safe havens.
Right, and so you can figure out where. Now, I live on a mountaintop in the middle of the Maine coast because Maine was held down by glaciers, and it's slowly rising. So once the crust comes free of the core, it's just going to pop up another 500 feet. So I'll be doing fine with a 600-foot tidal wave. But Florida, that's actually going to sink. The UK, that's going to sink. Japan is going to sink. So a lot of places, it isn't just a matter of a 600-foot tidal wave. And then, of course, all the ice in the whole world is in the wrong place, so that's going to melt. So the Zetas say the final sea level is going to be 700 feet above present. So the president isn't going to say what's going to happen. He's going to say there's a planet in between the Earth and the Sun, and now this is what I think, and speculation, because I'm not privy to the script here, but that he would turn it over to NASA, which would say, yes, there's a rogue planet, but we were prohibited by national security, but don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. If anything's going to happen, we'll tell you. And then maybe they turn it over to NOAA, which is saying, well, this huge Earth wobble is what's causing all this weather. They're never going to admit that global warming and climate change were a lie, because can you imagine the lawsuits? It would bring the whole world to a halt, because how many hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent on reducing fossil fuels? And, the thing is Planet X is roiling the magma, so the magma's circulating closer to the bottom of the crust, so the seafloors are warming, and the ice is melting from underneath. But the actual truth is the Arctic just had one of the coldest winters in years, and the amount of ice that formed this winter in the Arctic is unbelievable. Antarctica has been gaining ice. The top of the Himalayas and a lot of these glaciers are gaining ice. So this whole global warming thing, they're never going to use that phrase again. They would rather die than say global warming. So, I don't know how he's going to put it, but my opinion is he's got to announce it. And meanwhile, the government is doing all these strange things, like ordering 1.2 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition. They're going to arm these Social Security employees, and the National Weather Service employees are all going to be packing with hollow point bullets. I mean, come on, who thinks that's normal? What are they expecting? And of course, there's going to be some people who are going to riot and steal and loot and God knows what.
Well, things could be out of control.
Right, they could be out of control. But yet, if they do announce it, then people will go, well, this is something that we're all facing together. Let's work together to save as many people as possible. But they've got to do it sooner than later. Now, I live on a mountaintop. I heat with wood. I've got an outhouse. I'm ready for no electricity and no fuel. I live in a forest. I've got wood all around me. So, my theory is if you're ready for pole shift today, then you're going to be ready for it whenever else you can. But if you notice, around the world, the economy has not been getting better, regardless of what they're saying. And people are realizing every day that everything they've worked for all their lives is coming to naught. And hopefully people will say, well, really, what is important? And they'll realize, every time you see a disaster, you see people say, well, I lost everything, but, at least we all survived. And, that's what's important. And people are going to start realizing, well, maybe people are more important than possessions. But this Earth wobble, I went out last July to take a picture of the full moon rising over the mountain in Maine where I live. And when I was in elementary school, we had a target range in the basement. So when I was in the third grade, we had lockers all the way down the hallway, and every guy in the third grade had his own .22 caliber rifle in an unlocked locker in the hallway, and we all had bullets in our pocket, and we couldn't wait till 3 o'clock to go downstairs.
That wouldn't happen anymore.
No, and I grew up in the town next to Sandy Hook, so but there are people who've decided to be selfish and doing awful things, but the majority of everybody is very conscientious. Maine is second in the nation for guns per person and 49th in gun-related deaths per person. So, just because, So people are legitimately saying, well, wow, I got a feeling something's not right. And you see that show, Doomsday Preppers.
Oh, sure, yeah.
People are like, well, the economy isn't coming back. I mean, I was in Walmart the other day. They had 15 people in a 5-acre store. And I said to the cashier, I said, you can't even be paying your overhead with this. And she goes, oh, no, the economy's going to be coming back. Well, okay, fine.
Yeah, they've been hit hard.
That's what you say. But so I was out there taking pictures of the full moon, and I guess probably I learned to have a steady stance with my hands and a camera at an early age. I used to win NRA sharpshooter awards. And that was, starting in the 3rd grade. I mean, so anyway, I shot 2 pictures, and the mosquitoes were biting me like crazy. So I wanted to get a good picture of the full moon, and so I shot a whole series of pictures, and then I ran inside to get out away from the mosquitoes. And when I was playing them back on my computer, I realized that in 2 consecutive pictures, I hadn't moved my hands at all. There's a table up on top of the mountain, and there's the full moon. And in the second picture, the moon is moved to the right, not up. Now, if you think about it, everything, the moon, the stars, the sun, all rise in the east, go up to the midheaven, and then set in the west. And here I got 2 pictures of the moon, and between the 2 pictures, the moon moves sideways.
How'd that happen?
Well, that was like, I think the ETs, like I said, I've been in contact with ETs my whole life, and I think they guided me to do that because that is one of the most remarkable pictures. Now, I've gone out and watched Sirius rising and Orion rising in the east, and then I go back 20 minutes later, and all of a sudden it's like 45 degrees further south, but it isn't any higher in the sky. Now, why would that be? That's because every single day, Planet X pulls the magnetic bar of the Great Atlantic Rift down towards it, and then as the Earth continues to shift and the Atlantic no longer faces the sun, then the North Pole, which doesn't like the North Pole of Planet X, pushes the North Pole of the Earth back. So you get these wobbles, and what you get is this gigantic loops in the jet stream. So normally the jet stream moves from west to east, but now if you notice these weather maps, and why wouldn't you with all these big storms? So everybody's more interested in the weather than ever because it's really can be life or death. And what you get is these giant arcs of cold air coming down from the Arctic, and 30 miles to the east, you've got this giant arc of tropical air coming up from the Caribbean, and you've got this clash of fronts that makes these gigantic storms. I mean, look at Hurricane Sandy. And, if the government told the truth, they should say nobody should rebuild anywhere. But it's just like Katrina in New Orleans. People are saying, well, we're going to bring it back, and it's going to be so meaningful, and we're going to have Seaside Heights, New Jersey, ready for the tourist season. And, but the truth is nobody should be there now at all because this is right in the danger zone. They should be saying, well, we're going to move anyone that wants to go from the coast. And that's the interesting thing. The Zetas have said even when this is announced, probably only as much as 60%, but no more than that, are going to go, oh, my God, we've got to go to safety. And the rest are going to go, well, I really don't want to change anything, so I'm going to keep going to work. And if a tidal wave washes over me, then that's it. I'll just die. Well, okay, that's what this life is like. You're entitled to be a skeptic. You're entitled to be in denial, and you're entitled to die in it, but there's no reason for you to do that.
Hold on for a second, Gordon. We're coming back for phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM. Indeed, indeed, and we're going to take your phone calls when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Gordon, are you saying then in our solar system we've got a dark twin to Earth, we've got a burned-out binary star, and we have Planet X?
No, the binary star is quite a distance away. That's why it takes 3,657 years for Planet X to return. So it's something we've never seen because it's burned out, but it is a huge body, and that's where it started. And evidently, Planet X has been coming here at least 2 billion years. So It wasn't that the Anunnaki were always there. They reached a point where they decided they wanted to powder the gold and put it in their atmosphere to keep the planet a little bit warmer. It's got giant hot magma in its core, and it's got water, which has the highest specific heat of any substance in the universe, so it holds heat. It takes longer to heat water than anything in the universe, and water holds heat longer than any. So, but they were getting cold, so that's where the whole quest for gold came from, is from that. And Richard Hoagland has said that, and he's a guest on your show quite often.
Quite a bit.
He said that Phobos is a spaceship because it's hollowed out and it's got chambers in it because they use ground-penetrating radar. But actually, Phobos is one giant gold nugget, and the Anunnaki, since they came back, have been mining it with robots.
That's got to be worth something.
Oh my God! So if anybody thinks I'm making this stuff up, I mean, go do a search in Wyoming. Dick Cheney tried to get the Wyoming legislature, and he only failed by a few votes, to buy a used aircraft carrier. Now, what in the hell would Wyoming use?
There's no water there, is there?
Well, that's the thing is, Edgar Cayce said that Omaha was going to be the greatest seaport in North America after pole shift, and evidently he's planning that the Mississippi will split wide, or saltwater will go up to the Great Lakes, and then up the Missouri and the Platte rivers, and then maybe the Red River. And I guess they were planning to, keep it, in the Great Lakes or in the Gulf, and then float it right up to Wyoming. But you can see why he would want that. It's got nuclear power. It's got a hospital. It holds 5,000 people, and he could load it with fighter strike jets, and be king of the world. And you look at the billionaires around the Earth, they're trying to start their own space programs. But the Council of Worlds has said, no, nobody's going to leave Earth and come back as kings of the Earth afterwards. No, they're all going to have to go through it. And whether you're a billionaire or not, you're going to have to roll up your sleeves. So, you've heard of the idea of these deep underground bunkers everybody was going to head to.
Yeah.
But, how well are they going to survive in 10-plus power earthquakes? So they're not. But then, after pole shift, at the hour of pole shift, when the tidal waves start, then everyone's going to, after that, there won't be any earthquakes, so people are going to want to be underground, because how are you going to survive this fall of rocks?
Okay, let's go to the phones.
You to vote on the news, and here's the winner. There's a huge, hidden, heavenly body right here in our solar system. Evidence is mounting that either a brown dwarf star or a gas giant planet is lurking at the outermost reaches of our solar system, far beyond the planet Pluto. According to the British newspaper, The Independent, the object is 4 times the size of Jupiter. Experts say the presence of such a massive object could explain why a barrage of comets has been coming from that direction. We'll post